in the Bible. It's just before Peter, okay, and right after Hebrews in the Bible. So go to Revelation and then start going backwards. And you'll find it just before Peter's letter. I'm sorry, I don't put the page number, I should. Anyway, reading from James. There are a lot of opinions about James and about when it was written. It begins by talking about those who are in the diaspora or in the dispersion during the early years of Christianity. The early Christians became such a problem that they were driven out of cities and driven out, and so they were dispersed throughout the countryside and throughout the land. And this could be addressed to those Christians who find themselves in the great dispersion, living as foreigners in a foreign land, living as strangers in a foreign land. Even if they were living at home in their own towns, they were still living as strangers because they were so foreign to everybody else. Christians were just different people, and they didn't live the way everybody else lived. They were living a different life. So James addresses his letter to these poor Christians who have been dispersed and who are living kinds of as aliens in their own land. My brothers and sisters, he writes, do you with your acts of favoritism really believe in our glorious Lord, Jesus Christ? For if a person with gold rings and in fine clothes comes into your assembly, and if a poor person in dirty clothes also comes in, and if you take notice of the one wearing the fine clothes and say, have a seat here, please, while to the one who is poor you say, stand there, or sit at my feet, have you not made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my beloved brothers and sisters, has not God chosen the poor in the world to be rich in faith and to be heirs of the kingdom that he has promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich who oppress you? Is it not they who drag you into court? Is it not they who blaspheme the excellent name that was invoked over you? You do well if you really fulfill the royal law according to the scripture. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you show partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. For whoever keeps the whole law but fails in one point has become accountable for all of it. And I'm skipping down to verse 14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or a sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill, and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. Thus is the reading of the word.
Thanks be to God.
I remember when I was 12 or 13 years old, and I was in Logan Airport with my mother, and Connie Francis walked into the airport. A big star. I mean, this was 60s. And she had recorded that song, Where the Boys Are, for that fabulous film. And she'd recorded a bunch of other songs, Who's Sorry Now? She was a famous star. And my mother said, why don't you go over and ask her for her autograph? No! I was so terrified. I was so absolutely terrified of this celebrity. I can't even tell you today what she looked like, what she was wearing. I can't even tell you where she stood in the airport. I just know that the minute my mother said, why don't you go over and ask her for her autograph, that was the end of it. I just curled up into a ball and melted away on the floor. When I was in seminary, a good friend of mine, at my first year in seminary, was married to a Hollywood writer. And she knew that I loved Star Trek, the TV show. And because the first Star Trek movie came out that year, my boy, William Shatner, Captain Kirk, was now not just a TV star, but he was a movie star. She knew that I thought he was the cat's meow. And she said, you know what? My husband and I have been invited to a party at his house, and we'd like to take you with us. I was so nervous and I was so terrified and I was so excited, and I was going to go to William Shatner's house. Oh, gosh. And it was in Studio City, in the hills above Studio City, and they took me to his house, and I met him. And he was much smaller than I thought he would be. And he was much thinner than I thought he would be. And he was wearing chinos and a polo shirt. Well, it was his house. Hello. And I don't remember what I said to him. I do remember that what I really wanted to do was run and hide until it was time to go home. But I don't remember much about when I met him, when I was introduced to him. And they said, Amanda, this is William Shatner. And I don't know what I said. Maybe I said hello. All I remember is the somewhat surprised look on his face. One Sunday, at the church in Reseda, it was 1986, after the worship service, I was shaking folks' hands in the narthex. And one of the visitors who came through the line, the greeting line, I was shaking her hand and I was looking at her going, oh, I know you, but I don't know who you are. She was dressed like gym sweatpants and a t-shirt, something wrapped around her head. I said, gosh, your face is familiar. But I was thinking that, but I didn't really, I knew she was somebody I was supposed to know, but I didn't know who it was, and I was tongue-tied, and I kind of got very nervous, and I reached out to shake her hand, and I said, well, hello, welcome. That's all I could do, except rack my brain to try to figure out who the heck she was. I racked and I racked and I racked, and I finally figured it out. It was Stephanie Zimbalist, Remington Steel Star. Yeah, and it was 1986, and the TV show had just been canceled. She was looking for a church. She was looking for a sanctuary. She was looking for a place to be. And all I could do was sit there and go, oh, you're somebody. I mean, you're really somebody, aren't you? But I don't know who you are, but you're really somebody. If Johnny Depp or Leonardo DiCaprio or Clint Eastwood walked through the doors of this sanctuary, I'd probably swoon. I am guilty of being of having pedestal mania. I just invented that word. I define it by saying I know it sounds dirty, but it's kind of iconification. That sounds dirty too. Making people into icons, lifting them up as somebody who is so important, and putting them on a pedestal, and I do that. You probably don't. You're probably not like me. But I do. And maybe you don't do it with actors or people like that. Maybe you do it with politicians or journalists or radio stars or TV stars. Maybe you lift those people up onto pedestals and make them important. Maybe that's your form of iconification. I learned as I was reading this James passage that that's kind of an exclusivistic way of behaving. Because when you lift someone up on a pedestal, when you iconificate them, you exclude them. Now you see, James wasn't thinking that way, but I suddenly got the gist of what he was saying. That when you lift people up as being important, and you lift them up on a pedestal and you admire them and you hold them in awe, then you exclude them. You don't invite them or embrace them really to be a part of your community. You exclude them by your awe, by your pedestal mania. Now, why does this come into mind? When I was trying to read about this particular passage and knowing that John Wesley was a man who was very committed to understanding, having us all understand that it's wonderful to be people of faith, but if we don't live our faith, if we don't work with our faith, if we don't demonstrate our faith, if we don't share our faith by doing good works for human beings, then faith is not enough to give us salvation. Now, I need to move on quickly because I might get in trouble for saying that. But, like I said in the offertory statement, if we don't put our hands to the work, we don't recognize it. If we don't put our hands to work in our faith, we don't embrace our faith fully. We don't appreciate our faith fully. If we don't share it by getting our hands calloused, by touching the rest of the world, then we are not transformed by our faith. John Wesley was one who believed that we transform the world not by going out and beating over the head to follow Jesus, beating people over the head to make them follow Jesus. We transform the world by transforming ourselves. What we are to do is to transform ourselves and become new people in Jesus Christ. Now, John Wesley was ordained in 1728 as a priest. He left Oxford University and he went to work for his father. And the two of them were working as clergy together. And then Oxford called him back in 1729. They said, John, come back to Oxford. We need you to teach. So he started teaching at Oxford, and his younger brother Charles happened to be a student there at that particular time. time as well. And Charles had become very involved and very devoted and very dedicated to his Christian faith. And he had gotten together with some of his cronies, some of his fellow students, and they started a group. And the group was very committed to being disciplined in their faith, to studying the scriptures together, to discussing the scriptures together, to studying the Greek together, to even studying the classics together. Well, they didn't have TV. What else were they going to do? They got together and they fasted twice a week. They fasted every Wednesday and every Friday. They communed every week. They studied together, they prayed together, they were in meditation together. And after a year of refining the discipline of their faith, one of the members, there were more than 25 in this group, one of the members of the group said, I visited the castle prison today. I visited the castle jail today, and the prisoners there are suffering terribly. And he took Charles Wesley and John Wesley with him on his next visit. As a matter of fact, it was August 24th, 1730, took them to the prison, the castle jail, to visit the prisoners. And those two boys, those two Wesley boys, got an eyeful of what needed to be done for people who were less fortunate than them, people who had no clothes, who were naked in prison, who had no food in prison, who had no fuel to keep them warm in this prison. And they recruited their brothers in the club to go and start doing those visits at the jail. And it changed their lives. It changed what they were about. They became more than just those who studied. They became more than just those who read their Bible and studied the scriptures and discussed the classics and discussed God. They reached out and they touched people as their lives and as their Christian faith professed that they needed to do. They went and they got to know neighbors they never would have gotten to know before. It was William Morgan who took them to that jail. And they began to offer their care to the other clergymen in and around the area. And as those clergymen invited them to be helpers, to give of themselves, to work with the people, to give clothes, to care for the sick, to give food to the needy, to give of themselves, they transformed their lives. They transformed who they were. They kind of became a joke at Oxford. They were called by the other students the Holy Club or the Godly Club. They were even called something called the Supererogation Men. Say that 5 times fast. Supererogation Men, which means those who work beyond what is required. And eventually they were given the name Methodists. Eventually they were given the name Methodists, and that stuck. Because their method was not only to know what their faith called them to be, but to know what their faith called them to do. James says, don't distinguish between the people who come into your life. Don't lift some up and put some down. But be in communication, be in contact, be included with all. I guess that's what it means to